Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. We have Australian writer Annabel Smith here with her new book, Whiskey and Charlie, published by Sourcebooks right here in Naperville. Annabel, welcome to Naperville and Anderson's.
Thank you so much.
And I guess I should welcome you to the States in addition to all
yes,
that.
thank you. It's really great to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. Whiskey and Charlie. So now, literally, it's probably been out in Australia for over 2 years?
About 18 months.
18 months?
Yeah.
And here are just a few months?
Yes.
So I guess my question is, what have you been hearing from readers, at home, in Australia or New Zealand or even the UK, and what are you hearing from readers here in the US now about the book?
Really, I think the same things. I think because it's a book about family, and wherever you're from, in a way, family's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that people are connecting to it on that level. They're saying, I related to this. This reminded me of my relationship with my brother or my relationship with my son or those things. So similar responses that kind of people are responding to it on an emotional level and connecting it with their own family experiences.
Because, reading it really, I don't see any difference in the translation. I know this was probably Americanized a little bit, when it was published here by Sourcebooks. But the same emotions, the same thing happens with families between siblings, the rivalries, the jealousies, all those are all the same that we all face if you have a sibling. We all know to a certain degree. So tell us where the seed for this story started to grow. And because it really was such an unusual book, and we'll talk about how you set it up and how each chapter begins, which I thought was just absolutely brilliant. But tell us where the seed started to grow for this story.
Yeah, I actually just had an idea for a story about two brothers who wanted to get an entry in the Guinness Book of World Records. And the initial idea was that they would attempt all sorts of different ways to get into it, and the story would be about the attempts. Mostly the failed attempts they made. Yeah. But immediately I began writing it, I lost interest in the world records thing, and I just became interested in the relationship between the brothers. And within one scene, I'd written one scene, and at the end of the scene I wrote a note, twins. I was like, I want them to be twins. I want that intensity of their relationship to increase by that depth of connection that comes with twins.
And they are really close. They are young, but this is the story of the relationship as it goes on. And then there's a period of over 10 years where they don't even speak to one another, and they become extremely estranged. But this relationship of twins is so interesting. So I want to know, do you have basis? Do you have twins in your family?
No twins in my family, no, but I have had lots of twins in my life as friends. So growing up, we had family friends who were identical twins, very different to each other in personality. And then in primary school, my two best friends were twins. They were American, actually, American girls, and they were identical also, and so identical people always used to say, I can't pick them apart. But when I knew them, the differences were so clear to me. And then in my 20s, when I was writing this book, I had close friends also who were twin sisters, non-identical but very similar. I feel like I'd had lots of experience with twins.
Yeah. So you've been doing research for a long time.
Experiential research.
Well, yeah, exactly. But these two brothers are so interesting because they're so different from one another, sort of night and day. You have it's William, not Whiskey. His real name is William.
Yes.
These are the Fern brothers, right? So from this family, and then Charlie, who is sort of the opposite. Whiskey, who is so outgoing. He's the one who just sort of has that charisma. He gets the friends, he gets the girlfriends, all these types of things.
Things seem to come easily for him.
Right. And where Charlie is the more introverted, but you can see, but they sort of, when they're young, they pair together well. But what I thought was so brilliant about this book is the way you have them, because this book is a lot about communication. How we communicate as siblings, how we communicate as just human beings, one to another.
Absolutely.
But especially two people that are so close.
Yes.
And what happens when they fall apart and when something tragic happens.
And the funny thing about that is, after I wrote it, I realized, and I can't believe I didn't make this connection, but this is what happened to my dad and his brother. And I never, the whole time I was writing it, I never made that connection. And it was only afterwards I was like, well, actually, yes, my dad fell out with his brother and they didn't speak for 10 years. And then I kind of realized that probably unconsciously that was why I'd written this story, because there was a part of me that needed to understand, how does that happen? How do two people who are so close become so far apart?
Yeah. And I think so many families have experienced that.
Absolutely.
And you can say whatever your family situation is, but there is some bit of dysfunctionality.
Yes.
Whether you would say, oh, we're not perfect. And we all have that, no matter what the family situation is.
And that's what I hear so often from readers. And I've visited lots of book groups, and people say, this happened to my two brothers, or this happened between me and my sister. These falling outs, and both parties feel so much pain about it, but they don't know how to repair it.
Right. And in this book, and I don't want to do too many spoilers because people have to read this for themselves. They absolutely have to. But I want to know, how did you channel the boy in this yourself? Being, of course, being a girl.
Yeah.
But these two boys, and channeling that boy. Do you have brothers yourself?
I have two brothers.
Ah, there you go.
Yes. And I guess I just thought about my brothers and growing up around, in fact, in my village that I grew up in England, I had my two brothers, our two next door neighbors were brothers, my local cousins, two boys, and I was surrounded by boys. I didn't have many girlfriends that were close by me in my, regular play. I spent a lot of time around boys.
Yeah. So this sort of knowing, just writing from their perspective was you just experienced it basically by being surrounded by boys when
it
you're
just felt
up.
like,
Right.
what are the kinds of things they said to me, and what are the kinds of things they talked about, and yeah.
But these two brothers have an interesting way of communicating, which I thought was really absolutely wonderful on this. They have walkie-talkies. But the way you set this all up was all about with the NATO phonetic alphabet, the radio alphabet that we all know by Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and of course ending all the way in Zulu. But I just love the way you set this up.
Thank you.
So where did that little tidbit come from to put this and to organize the book in this way? So every chapter, and then fitting that word into the story, I thought was it became sort of like, oh, how is she going to do this one? How is she going to do this one?
Yes.
And then I was wondering, what were the hard ones of trying, when you get to the end of the NATO phonetic alphabet, how you did that?
Yeah. So where it came from was actually completely random. I had a friend staying with me, and I heard him on the phone quoting his car registration and using the proper alphabet, not saying like M for mommy or D for daddy, saying the real words. And I was like, oh, I've always wanted to learn that alphabet. Can you teach me? And he said, yeah. So I walked around for 2 weeks, literally nonstop, saying this to myself: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. And that was the exact time that I was starting to write this book. And I had been in a writing group with a woman who was putting together a collection of short stories based on traditional patchwork quilt patterns. So each story, I was like, what a great idea. I would love to write a book that kind of had some sort of interesting structuring principle. And just one day I was saying this stuff to me, and at the same time I had this idea about this story of the brothers. I was like, oh, I wonder if I could write a book based on this. And at that time there was no connection in my mind between the two brothers and the alphabet. But I just wanted to try it, and that's what I like about writing, is that experimentation. Could this work? Could I make this work?
And it totally worked. I thought it was so
I'm so
wonderful.
pleased you think that.
And it's so great that so many of the names come from the alphabet.
So obviously Charlie, Oscar, Juliet, they were all characters.
Right.
And then, I had Quebec, and I had Lima. So, well, someone has to go to Peru, or someone has to come from Peru, and the same with Quebec. But then, as you say, there were some hard ones.
Well, the end of the alphabet is always difficult for some people when they're doing any kind of alphabet story, whether it's a picture book or whatever.
Yeah, because you're having to bring everything together, but also connect it to that structure. Yankee was my worst. I did not know how I was going to tie that in. I was like, what can I possibly put in? So that one troubled me. But I also had trouble with Kilo, and I left Kilo. I was like, I'm just going to skip that chapter and I'm going to come back to it later. And then I kind of looked at the map of the story, and I was like, okay, I need a chapter about Charlie and his girlfriend's relationship here, and Kilo became that. But when it got translated into American, it's sort of lost a little because you guys don't use the metric system. So,
but we still know those words.
You know the words.
We don't use them on a day-to-day basis in the way we measure.
You know what
anything.
they mean.
But yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But Yankee, I learned something, and I won't give it away. People have to read it themselves.
Okay.
Well, we'll just say it's a little bit to do with horse racing. Horse racing. It was very cool. So there's something that happens in the book now that they haven't been speaking for so many years and they have grown apart, and there's been so much resentment. But what really was surprising to me is that in families, one family member can look at an event or look at a person and another can see it completely different. And so this was sort of a point of view book that you're realizing we know what Charlie feels and how Charlie feels about whiskey, but what do we really know about whiskey? And it was so interesting because family members see things so very differently from one another, the same exact things.
Yes, and which is strange considering they've had so many of the same influences, and often we have the same core beliefs when we come from the same family, and yet still we can see a completely different, have a completely different interpretation of an event or an incident.
Yeah. And I think with them being twins, and since you had all that research growing up in a way, you were right there. But also, did you do any other research? Because in this book, without spoilers, something tragic happens to Whiskey, and we know that the things that happen. He's in a hospital, and we don't want to spoil anything that happens in there. But did you do any research on some of the aspects of all of that?
I did a lot of research into that because. And I guess it's not really a spoiler to say this because you learn it in the first chapter, but Whiskey is in a coma, and I, touch wood, thank goodness I've never had experience with that. And I needed to understand that both from a medical standpoint, but also what is it like to be a family member of a person in a coma? What is it? What do you go through emotionally? What are your days like when you sit every day in a hospital? Also, what are the complications that can arise as a result of coma? What even is a coma, in fact? I didn't even really understand what a coma was. I wasn't sure when I was writing the book if Whiskey would recover from the coma or not. And I'm obviously not going to say whether he does.
You can't.
But I needed to research how long can a person survive in a coma. What are the recovery stages if I do decide that's what I want? What might be the implications the longer he stays in the coma? How does that affect what happens if he comes out, or if they turn off life support? How does that process work? Or do people in comas die? I needed to kind of look at research all of that, and that helped me to make my decision around what would happen to him, and also how the people around him behaved and responded.
Right, and of course the way they responded, knowing what should they do,
knowing
what is the outcome for him. Yeah.
And I guess that's the thing, is that one of the things I learned is that there's so much uncertainty, and there isn't any, oh, well, this person's going to wake up or they're not going to wake up. There's a lot of unknown things from even the biggest experts can't say.
Yeah, because every case is so very different.
Every case is different, exactly.
And the outcome is always very different. So Charlie, in this whole thing, and he realizes, he hears that his brother has been in this accident, hasn't spoken to him in so long, and he realizes that he doesn't know him anymore, and talking about if he dies, he wouldn't even know what songs he would want played at his funeral. He doesn't know that. But he does realize that they're still connected. And maybe that twin connection is stronger than maybe that sibling, but I think all siblings feel that way, because there's something you experience as children growing up. But I thought that was so interesting that he feels that way about all of that.
Yeah, and I think it's almost instant for him. I think he thinks in one part of his mind he's written Whiskey off, but as soon as there is the possibility that Whiskey really might not be there, he understands immediately that he hasn't written him off, that he's thought that there'll be time to repair their relationship. And he's now faced with the fact that there may not be time.
Yeah. And I loved Rosa.
She's a very popular character.
I know, I just love her character.
She is, I think, my best loved character.
Yeah. Well, that's another good question. So who was your favorite character to write? Who did you relate to the most? And who was the hardest one to say goodbye when you finished the book?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, I think really Charlie was my baby, you know. I started the book with Charlie and I saw everything through his eyes. So even when he was being so frustrating and painful, I felt for him. I felt compassion for him. I was very fond of Charlie's, you know, long-suffering girlfriend, Julia. She's a very sweet and kind person. But I think the character I probably relate to most is Rosa. You know, Rosa stirs the pot. You know, she's like, let's get all of these issues out into the open. And she confronts this, I suppose, in some ways, very English family who want to sweep things under the carpet. But I also guess, I mean, I loved Oscar. Oscar was based on my nephew. Some of those little stories come from stories from my nephew. So he's a small character, but also one I'm very fond of.
But Rosa was so, I mean, she was, you know,
gutsy.
She didn't take any crap from anybody.
No. She tells it like it is. She doesn't let people get away with anything.
Right. And she really gets who whiskey is. She really gets
and in a way, it's like she's the first person who really saw that.
Right. So my question, did you sit down with the story now, because I know the outline and starting every chapter with part of the phonetic alphabet doing that. But did you sit down to outline it, or I so like to hear that. You know, I know some authors really keep to that strict outline, but knowing that you are writing it and surprising yourself.
Oh, all the time. I don't think I would enjoy writing a book if I knew what was going to happen. I enjoy finding out what's going to happen myself. So I start with the two brothers. I start to write the chapters. And then I see where it goes. And people said to me, oh, I was in such suspense about whether whiskey was going to live or die. How did you maintain that suspense? And I said, because I didn't know myself. I didn't make that decision until very late, which way that was going to go.
But I think that we interpret it the same way. I mean, we are on the edge of our seats, just like you are when you're writing it. So I think that's really...
That's what makes it fun for me, is not knowing, is almost letting the characters just come to life in my head and then do their own thing.
Now, Annabel, you grew up in the UK, and as a teen, your family moved to Australia, similar to what happens to
Charlie,
to the twins. Yeah, to the twins. So was that, you built part of that into the story for them?
I did.
Yeah. And so what was that like, reliving all of that for yourself and moving to another country?
It was a really difficult thing to do. I think it was a hard age, early teenagers. And I guess I incorporated that in Charlie's experience, and it was like another level to Charlie's experience. And in fact, it was based on my experience with my brother, where we went to this new school and my brother was the cool kid and everyone loved him, and I was kind of a square, and I found it hard making friends. People used to come up to me all the time and say, are you Stuart Smith's sister? Like that girls would always be, are you Stuart Smith's sister? I was like, oh.
So you knew.
I knew that feeling.
Well, and you knew how Charlie felt about whiskey, that sort of thing. So this book was published, of course, originally in Australia initially, and it was, but it was called Whiskey Charlie Foxtrot.
Yes.
So adding one more letter in the alphabet. And the cover, I looked at the cover, very interesting cover with the boys head to head.
Completely different to the cover here.
Cool. But then now published here in Source Books, which is right here in Naperville. So New York Times independent publisher, which is so cool. So tell us the difference between publishing in Australia, and it's been published in other countries too, but now working with an American publisher. And what happens in that process to change the book a little bit, maybe, which I'm not sure I agree with all the time, that it needs to be Americanized. But tell us a little about working with Source Books and what happened to them.
Well, so my Australian publisher, Fremantle Press, they took it to Frankfurt and gave it to Shana Drees from Sourcebook. And Shana said the cover caught her attention, and she said, I'm going to have a 5-minute look at this. She was just telling me this actually. She said 4 hours later she looked up from her computer. And she got back almost immediately to say, you know, I love it, we want to publish it. And my publisher sent me an email, and my book had been out for about 4 months then in Australia. And my understanding of the publishing process was that if it hadn't been sold internationally right at the start, then it probably wasn't going to happen. So I got this surprise email on a Saturday morning on the way home from the beach with my husband and son in the car, and I was like, oh my gosh! I was, blown away and so excited. And the Sourcebooks team have been so amazing to work with.
That's
I think because they're kind of like a small publisher, and they have that they're really nurturing. They all read your book, and really I felt like they got behind it in a lovely way.
So in what way was the book Americanized a little bit?
Well, that was a funny process. Yeah. So I don't think I had realized that would happen.
Yeah.
And so then they sort of sent me back in the editing process all the highlighted things they wanted to change. So they wanted to change rubbish bin to trash can, and all of those sort of very obvious ones, nappy to diaper. But then there were some other ones, like they were like, there was one where one character says, "Don't come the raw prawn with me, mate," which is a classic Australian expression for sort of like, don't try to pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Don't try to fool me. And they were like, oh, there was like a little note, Americanized, and I was like, no way. I'm not giving you that one. That one has to stay.
Yeah. That's too perfect. That's such a great one.
And I think that's part of the joy of reading a book from another country, is kind of seeing what are their idioms, how do they express things.
Yeah, and I would, it's a, I noticed you had a quote from Graham Simpson, who wrote, Rosie.
The Rosie Project.
And he's been here for an event. And I don't think they did that to Rosie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it's interesting how I think something's a little bit lost in translation, just on a few words or phrases or things like that. But it's just interesting how things change, and I kind of wish they hadn't done anything.
Yeah. Well, I felt like they were great about it, because they were very much like, we don't want to change anything that feels wrong for you. And so there were a couple they questioned, like, can we change oval to track? And oval is the pitch on which we play Australian rules football.
Yeah.
I was like, an oval is a very specific thing. It's not like a track, so that absolutely can't be changed.
The track you couldn't play Australian rules football on a track.
No, and you wouldn't run on an oval.
That's true. Yeah, just flip it the other way.
Yeah.
That's very, very true. I was looking at your website, and this is so interesting when I talk to authors, because most authors are such voracious readers themselves. And you have a lot of books that you have read and you're recommending to others to read. And it's 6 Degrees of Separation. So tell us a little bit about that, because I thought that was really cool.
So that's a fun little meme that I set up with a fellow author, Emma Chapman, and each month we choose a book that we've both read and liked, and we make a chain of 6 books. So we connect the first book to a second book, and then we connect that second book to a third book. And the connections can be based on absolutely anything. They can be, the covers look similar, they have the same word in the title, they're by the same author, or they can be very idiosyncratic. So sometimes I've connected books because I read this book and this book on my honeymoon, and therefore in my mind they're connected. And then we invite other bloggers to make their chain using the same first book.
Oh, that's
and
great.
People take them in all different directions.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, that's so cool. And also I noticed you had a little part on your website where you're helping other budding writers who are interested in becoming, authors themselves, giving them some tips on how to do things. And I think I'd read that you had worked in a writers group on Whiskey and Charlie.
That's right.
Yeah,
I have 5 or 6 other Perth-based authors who we meet sort of every 1 to 2 months to critique each other's work. I just find that such a valuable process.
Yeah, I would think for sure. And there's a quote in here, and Charlie starts seeing a therapist.
Yes.
And when Whiskey's in the hospital and he's talking to a therapist and all that, and there's a great quote in here, and it's been quoted before, and I just think it's so beautiful, because it really does make you think, and I know you've said something about this too, that it really means something to you. There are some things in life we never feel ready for, that it's only by doing them that we become ready, which is so true. And a lot of that is fear, of not doing things. But I thought that was so wonderful.
Thank
you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite quote of the book myself, when Sourcebook said, can you pull some quotes out of the book? And that was the first one I thought of.
Yeah, and I think probably, the way we relate to friends and family and even our own children and those things, because that truly is something that I think I think if you keep that in a forefront of your mind, it's a great sort of compass for things, you know. It's really wonderful. So I want to know about you have another novel, The Ark, and it is an interactive novel and app.
Yes.
So tell us a little about that. This fascinates me. So tell us about this book.
Yeah, it's very different to Whiskey and Charlie. It's about a group of scientists and their families who retreat into a bunker inside Mount Kosciuszko in Australia during a post-peak oil crisis about 25 years from now. And it's about the first 2 years inside that bunker and what happens to that group of people. So I suppose in some ways it is a kind of apocalyptic book, but it doesn't really focus on the apocalypse. It doesn't focus on what happens outside. It focuses on the relationships and the dynamics of the people inside the bunker. And it's told as a series of documents, digital documents, memos, emails, text messages, extracts from policy and procedure documents. So it's as though years after the bunker, the people lived in the bunker, somebody has curated these documents to tell the story of what happened.
I love stories that are told in the epistolary sort of form that are so,
I like it.
So wonderful.
It was very fun to write.
Yeah. So now the app. Tell us how the app works then.
So it essentially allows people to dive deeper into the world of the novel. So they can I had some little animations made. So I had architects create a model of the bunker, and you can do little fly-throughs and see parts of the bunker, and they've got like little cool sound effects and stuff like that.
Great. Yeah.
It's got a fan fiction hub, so I've had people create their own, you know, I'm going to tell this scene from this person's point of view, or I'm going to give this character's backstory. So there's been some really fun and creative fan fiction responses too.
Oh, that's so neat. That's so cool. So I want to know, what are you working on now, and what's coming up next? So and
I'm working on.
It's got to come over here too. So next book you got to come back to see
thank
us.
you. I would love to do
right.
that. My next book is the first book in a trilogy. It is an epic quest with a sort of speculative fiction twist. It is about a trio of very unlikely heroes who have to join forces to overthrow a sadistic cult before a tsunami destroys their city. So it's a completely, it's an action adventure. It's got a young, innocent boy, a kind of jaded ex-drug addict, and a super intelligent monkey. They're my trio of characters.
Oh, wow, that sounds great. Oh my gosh. So a trilogy.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
A trilogy.
Yeah,
which is new for me. I've never written something that big.
Yeah.
And in fact, this book, you were asking me about my writing process, but this book actually has involved a little bit of planning, because I don't think I could write something that big without any idea of where it was
having that story arc to build off
I
of.
did need that for this one.
Okay, so I end these little interviews with a quiz. So no pressure. You know all the answers. So it's kind of a lightning round. So whatever comes to mind first off.
All right.
What was your favorite what was your favorite book when you were a child?
I would say The Magic Faraway Tree.
Okay. Okay, do you remember something at university that maybe you absolutely loved?
I loved The Great Gatsby. I fell in love with it. I read it in high school and I hated it, and I told my mum it was a stupid book and I didn't understand why it was so popular. 2 years later, obviously something in me had changed. I read it, I said, this is one of the most wonderful books ever written.
Isn't that interesting? Just a few years in between readings can
maturity.
change. There, that's one of the key words there I was looking for. Okay, what about a book you've been an evangelist for? Something you've read that you could not tell enough people that they had to read.
That would be Anne Patchett's Bel Canto. Okay. I adore that book. I think it is one of the most wonderful books about human relationships. And gorgeous prose.
Yeah. What would you call a guilty pleasure read?
Oh, I actually like young adult science fiction / romance. That's my kind of guilty pleasure.
That's not so guilty.
It's not very guilty, I know, but I'm a bit of a snob, so for me that is sort of guilty. It's
good.
not
Everyone
quite
has a different definition.
Enough, you know.
So it's good, but they're they're just a great story. They kind of just
they're a great story,
nice
and they have a little bit of romance, and they have a bit of action, and
okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Annabel.
Thank you
and thanks for coming to see us. And I absolutely love Whiskey and Charlie, and I hope everyone else reads it too.
Thank you.
Next book, come and see us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. great conversation about a book about love, redemption, about families. It's called Whiskey and Charlie by Australian author Annabel Smith. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.